children and pregnant mothers.
Mexican officials have announced the creation of a new task force to address the migrant surge of the U.S.-Mexican border, a move that comes after U.S. officials pressed the nation to do more to stem the crisis. The latest with ABC's Rachel Bade.
Sources telling ABC News that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas pushed Mexico to step up immigration enforcement within their country, help reopen ports of entry, and encourage migrants to stay in Mexico. Mexico's Foreign Affairs Minister heeding that request, telling reporters after the meeting that as part of the new task force, Mexico will regularly meet with countries in Central and Latin America. The next meeting will be in January. One senior U.S. administration official telling ABC News that the U.S. is pleased with what Mexico proposed.
And the Colorado Republican Party wants the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn a ruling to remove former President Donald Trump from the Colorado ballot. With more news more often, I'm Ben Hayes here at AM 1290 and FM.
Welcome to the Arts and Antique Radio Show, where your host, nationally recognized certified appraiser Elizabeth Stewart, Santa Barbara's treasure sleuth, will help you put a value on the treasures in your own home.
Every time it rains, pennies from heaven. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from heaven?
So let's find out. How valuable is it?
1, you're live.
Hello, Santa Barbara. It's your chantress of everything valuable and beautiful, Elizabeth Stewart. And I'm really excited to speak with a wonderful scholar. We were just before the show went on the air thinking about this. Dr. Peter Sturman mounted a show called The Artful Recluse, Painting Poetry and Politics in 17th Century China, which won the Alfred H. Barr Jr. Award for Museum Scholarship. I attended that show and I brought friends numerous times, and then I had the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Sturman on the radio show, and we were just remarking, trying to think, oh, that was 2012. And so Dr. Sturman is back with me today to talk about a one-day only lecture series called Flowers, Gardens, and Self-Reflection in Chinese Painting. This is on January 6th at the museum, at the Art Museum, Santa Barbara Art Museum of Art. And he's convening a number of the top scholars in this field. And we talk about some of the lecture topics that will go on that one day. So if you're interested in a really different way of looking at the relationship between art and nature and text, I think this would be a real eye-opener. I know the Artful Recluse for me, Dr. Sturman, was an eye-opener because it was like, this is a different concept. This isn't how, in college in the 80s, I learned art history. It was so different from that kind of approach. And I want to talk about that too. But I want to introduce Dr. Sturman first. So Peter Sturman, his area of study is the text and image relationship in Chinese painting and calligraphy. He focuses on the literati culture of Northern Song, and also published on landscape painting of the 10th and 11th centuries, court and loyalist art, and recently painting and calligraphy of the 17th century. As was saying, I remember with great fondness seeing the 2012 exhibition at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art called The Artful Recluse, Painting, Poetry, and Politics in the 17th Century China. His recent scholarship includes Shenzhou's Falling Blossoms project of the early 16th century, and he's part of a collaborative study of Zhu Wei, who lived from 1521 to 93, Ming Dynasty playwright, poet, calligrapher, and painter. Like I said, he will participate in this one-day lecture series at our museum on January 6th, Flowers, Gardens, Self-Reflection in Chinese Painting. And so I guess, Dr. Sturman, thank you for being here, talking with us about this. What do you feel is the overriding contribution that as a convening of these scholars, what will it bring us?
Well, first of all, I want to give credit to my colleague Susan Tai, at the curator of Asian art at the Santa Barbara Art Museum.
Yes.
She was the one who helped organize bringing this exhibition from New York, and was the major person kind of pushing to have this kind of one-day slate of papers. And this has been kind of Susan's modus operandi. She likes to, she feels it brings a proper kind of conclusion to an exhibition if we can bring in some experts who can provide insights to some of the work in an exhibition, provide new dimensions to what the subject matter might be. And most people see exhibitions, they come, they visit, they appreciate, they like some pieces more than others. You know, everybody gets something else out of an exhibition, but very few people actually buy the catalog, I would say, or read further. So I think, to answer your question, this, having a one-day opportunity to listen to people who spend most of their lives kind of studying these things really does open doors. It's like going to a good lecture that, brings you to, insights and opens up a world that you didn't really know about before. And that's the beauty of art history. I mean, we look at paintings, and paintings are silent. They don't talk, and particularly Chinese paintings actually talk a lot, and they have so much writing on them, but for the most part, we can't read the writing. Even contemporary Chinese people who are native speakers rarely can read the kinds of texts that are written on them. So there's a lot there to be unpacked, and I think that's the beauty of an exhibition like this, and the one-day event. We get an opportunity to go a little bit deeper into some of the paintings and further our appreciation.
Just a dumb question. You mentioned that a contemporary speaker of the language can't read the calligraphy on the works. Why is that?
I would say, in general, it all, of course, depends on the education level of the individual, and to a certain degree, their age. And there are multiple reasons, but I mean, the most important one is that the language, that it's not so much the characters. The characters can be read for the most part, though modern day Chinese tends to use simplified Chinese characters. So some of the younger generation don't read the older version of the characters that well. But I would say more importantly is the language that's used. It's what we call classical Chinese. And it's quite different. It's a very literary Chinese, or classical Chinese is it's just a different kind of language. So it's a very highly educated form of communication, and tends to be very concise and abbreviated in many regards, and just less colloquial, so harder for modern people to understand.
Could I ask the more literate, highly educated language that you're speaking about, is it how do I want to put it? Is it in abbreviated in content? Is it more analogous language? Is it more metaphorical?
All of the above.
All of the above. Okay, so it's more symbolic.
Yeah, it just tends to be more concise. You have to kind of read into it. There's a use of allusions,
Okay.
and citations and references. It's almost like a secret language that, if you're indoctrinated into it and you're trained to read it, you can read it fairly readily. It's kind of it's a fairly elite form of communication, quite frankly.
So can you give us, I know that an English translation of, let's say, a line, to give an example of what this would have looked or sounded like?
What it would sound like?
Well, what it would feel like, what it would symbolize. So example, like if I took a poem and I took a line out of two roads diverged, let's say, that would be a way of saying, well, one has two choices in life, and it broadens out in a way that is chronological but also metaphorical, this sort of thing. So if you pick a line, for example, and tell us what that line is, and then maybe could you, Dr. Sturm, explain what it means?
Sure. I can do that because I have on my computer here a line that I was just kind of working with to open my talk next Saturday. So this is the frontispiece to the scroll by Bada Shanran called Flowers on a River. And it's Han Yan Dan Wo Ru Jian Qi Ren. So that's the total number: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 characters, broken up 4 and 4. Han Yan Dan Wo. Okay, that's the tricky part. The second half, Ru Jian Qi Ren, is I think most people can understand that in contemporary Chinese. It's like seeing the person. That's what it means, literally, like seeing the person. Hanyan Dan Mo, that's cold mist, light ink, like seeing the person.
Okay.
So that's the frontispiece that opens up this long, incredibly long hand scroll, written by the former president of China during the Republican period.
Not that long ago, then.
Not that long ago, but he was a very Bada Shanran himself didn't live. I mean, he lived, relatively speaking, I mean, by American terms, he lived a long time ago, but in Chinese terms, he was, 17th century. But yeah, it's I think there's a lot to unpack just from that one line. First of all, the idea that somebody would add that as a title and what that message kind of conveys. Using this kind of poetic, cold, evocative language to in very concisely 4 characters: cold, mist, light, ink, which more or less encapsulates what you see in the scroll. I mean, you don't see mist, which is kind of interesting, but of course there's lots of ink. But so he's kind of reacting in a poetic way to what he sees in the scroll.
So let me see if I can try to get this right. Cold mist, light ink. Cold as in temperature, mist as in fog, light as in the light touch.
Right.
Not the light itself of the sun, but the light touch, and then ink.
Right.
Like seeing a person, person, a specific thing. Okay, so when mist is cold, it hangs in the air in a very light way, and it's always gray. And I would assume that the ink would be put on in a very light touch that would be also more close to the grisaille, to the gray tones, than the strident, black of the blackest ink, and therefore would evoke like a day like today, where it's misty and gray and there's no color in the air. Like seeing the person, it would be like seeing a person through the fog, not completely clear, but then again, you never know what you're seeing when you do look at a person.
Well, that's a nice way of putting it. But interestingly, the painting itself doesn't really use, I mean, it uses some light ink, but it uses a lot of dark ink too. So it's I think here light ink is more like the character for light can mean multiple things, but it fundamentally it means something like how to put it, kind of without over exaggeration. In other words, it's somehow speaks to the character of the person who has certain kind of substance and rootedness and things like that. So there's a lot here. I mean, just in those 4 characters, and then in some ways the other 4 characters are even more telling. Ruji and Shirenya, like seeing the person. So the very fact that the person who wrote this looks to the painting and really feels like he can understand the person who did the painting, which is really fundamental to much of Chinese art. And the fact that this was the former president of the Republic of China, I find it very interesting. I mean, we think of presidents as political figures and administrators, maybe of some culture, but not necessarily a lot. But this guy, he was Hu Shichang. He was a significant figure, and he was the teacher. He was the tutor of the child emperor in the palace in the Qing dynasty. And clearly this is a man of tremendous knowledge and understanding and education. And he was a pretty good calligrapher too. I'm just looking at this frontispiece and thinking, that's amazing that people could write like that.
When we get back, Dr. Sturman, I want to ask you this line, like seeing the person. Is the poet saying, like seeing the person, that that art almost stands before the actual subject? That people always say this, once you see this film, for example, you can never quite look at real life the same way. So the artifice stands in front of the quote unquote reality, and that brings up the nature of perception. Like, this is really kind of, you say 4 characters, it's very deep, really.
It is.
Yeah. Richard, let's go to a quick break. And I want to say, Dr. Sturman gave us some really cool music. And you'll hear that as we go through the ins and outs of the breaks. And I love Come Rain or Come Shine. I absolutely love this. One of my favorite songs. Love it. Okay, don't turn that dial. We are talking about a one-day lecture series, Flowers, Gardens, Self-Reflection in Chinese Painting. It's happening at our museum at the end of the show that was hanging there. And this will be a consortium of great scholars who spend their life looking at this sort of art, January 6th, and they're flying in from all over the world. It's an amazing slate at our museum. And I understand from the public relations department, it's met with a lot of really great interest in the community. So if you're interested, you need to go on the museum's website and get your tickets right away. I'm speaking with one of the presenters, Peter Sturman, who is a professor at our own university, UCSB, and he's going to be joined by colleagues from all over, like I said, all over it, and great, great minds coming together. What a cool thing. Don't turn the dial. Back in a minute.
Okay, you're clear.
Do I have time to go to the coffee machine?
Go for it. Go now. You saw that other gentleman here. I was doing a little equipment tutorial for him.
Very good.
New piece of equipment that I'm lending him to interface with his excuse me, with his computer to be able to record what he wants to at home.
Well, one thing's for certain, nothing's a secret anymore. Everything
No,
is
not anymore.
one way or another.
Well, I will tell you that I never ever, I've been doing this for over 44 years, started when I was 19, and I never wanted there to be secrets for 2 reasons. Number one, if I hold on to all of the information that I've gathered and I try to protect my territory, so to speak, I don't get to do anything else. I am stuck, number one. So I want to share everything I know with as many people as possible so they can do what I've been doing so I can move on and do other things. Number two, and this This phrase works on so many levels. If you have secrets to keep, you have secrets to keep. If you have no secrets to keep, you have no secrets to keep. And I point that directly at most every governmental body on the planet. Why are you people spying on one another? Why are you trying to protect all of this information? Because the ancient wisdom teachings tell us there is nothing new under the sun. You say it's mine, I have a patent. BS. There's nothing new under the sun. But that's just me. Okay. And I won't put that on anybody else. That's just me. So I will share everything that I can so I can move on and do other things.
Richard's an open book.
I am. Except for chapter 12. Most of it's redacted. But that was the government's choice. They said, nope, can't tell people that. I have fun with it. I will tell you. I just have fun with it. How about you, Elizabeth? Do you have any secrets?
Probably.
I love it. All right, stand by. We are about to come back.
1960. Learn more about the affordable 4-step cleaning process that cleans your carpets with your safety in mind.
Go! In 3, 2, 1, you're live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I'm speaking with Dr. Peter Sturman, who's a professor at UCSB and studies, text-image relationships in Chinese painting and calligraphy. And the wonderful lecture that we're going to be treated with January 6th, it's a group of the greatest scholars in the field, and the title is Flowers, Gardens, Self-Reflections in Chinese Painting. It's January 6th. And we're talking about something really interesting, the relationship. So let me go back, and there's a scroll that was written by a very high up administration official in the Republic period in China, which is not that long ago in Chinese history, 17th century, but in our parlance, yes, it's ancient. And Dr. Sturman was saying, look, the way that the frontispiece or the title is described by the poet / artist is just in 4 succinct characters. The characters are cold, mist, light, ink. Cold, mist, light, ink, like seeing the person. And that's the introduction.
If I can just correct you for a second.
Please.
That 8-character phrase was written by somebody in the early 20th century, but the painting was by, somebody totally different in the 17th century, the very end of the 17th century.
Right. So I was thinking the Republic period is just, as recent as, what is it, 20?
1911 it ended.
1911, yeah.
1911 it started. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So he's titling the scroll that was authored in the 17th century, Cold Mist, Light Ink. And here's my question. I always thought that with calligraphy, it was just the gradations of tonality were done with water, not by different colors of ink. In other words, my question is about the light ink. You mentioned the scroll is mostly dark ink. So why would this be, titled light ink? Wouldn't it be like a wash? So it is dark ink, but it's washed to gray, right? Or no? Yeah.
Yeah, it's but like I mentioned earlier, this character is kind of a loaded term, light. That's just one translation of a number of possible meanings. It's a it really even ties into philosophical concepts of the ideal quality of a scholar, somebody who is harmonious and without, you know, exacerbated or exaggerated kind of action or words. So light ink is, you know, doesn't really apply if we're looking at the painting. I mean, it does have light ink in it, but it also has dark ink, which everybody will see when they, unfortunately, the scroll is so long, it fills all of the room. And they have to, I believe they had to cut out, I'm not really 100% sure now, but I think they, in order to show the whole painting, they had to not show the frontispiece or the long inscription that followed it by the artist.
So that word light could actually mean suggestive or subtle.
Yes.
Like a cat's paw, kind of.
Yes.
Delicately placed. Okay. And like seeing the person, like seeing the artist.
Right.
Like actually knowing who that artist was. The art would bring the scholar in close proximity to that artist's personality.
That's exactly right.
Well, that is fantastic. That's the breakdown of what we were trying to do, Richard, was trying to think how the relationship of the art and the words, how they mesh together, and why, you know, why it's so different in this scholarship than, for example, titling. I remember I remember I had on my committee for my dissertation, I had a native French speaker, and my French is good enough I could kind of understand his critique. And he's, instead of saying like we would say in English, I'm reading your work, his comment to me, and I never forgot it, was, I'm reading you. And I thought that's so interesting because he's not. He hasn't really, I mean, outside of the fact that we met in his office a couple of times, he doesn't really even know me.
Right.
But to read, you know, 300 and 400 pages of my writing, I'm reading you. And that's how it is in French. So it's different. So the concept of those words is, you know, it's different than in English. But I'm so glad you broke these 8 characters down. So it's 4 and 4, right? Okay. And showed us how this relates to give us another. Can you give us another example? This is so much fun.
Now you're challenging me. Let's see if I can find something here quickly. Well, one of the beautiful works in the exhibition is a pair of paintings by Stewart, who's also going to be one of the subject of one of the papers. So let me see if I think I have a translation of the 2 poems that are on there. Okay, here we go. So this is, I wish I could show this to your audience, but they can see it if they see the exhibition. It's a really interesting painting of a fish, a carp, kind of leaping out of the water, but painted in such a way that it's totally unconventional. I mean, your average person seeing the painting is not going to know that. But I mean, I've seen many fish paintings, and I've never seen a painting quite like this. It looks very abstract. And this artist was very eccentric. He was also problematic as an individual. He suffered from illnesses, including mental health issues. But anyway, he was also brilliant, and so he wrote this poem that goes together with this image of a fish, which looks literally like it had jumped out of the water and then was falling back on its back and splashing in the water. And it says, cold fish stench fills the paper blown by a flapping thin breeze. White scales fly forth, and the ink pond is empty. I truly hate this floating world for its many unseeing eyes. Who gets that its ordinary form was once that of a dragon?
Say that one more time. Give us that poem one more time.
It's pretty dense, I know. Cold fish stench fills the paper blown by a flapping thin breeze. That first line is so unusual. So he's and this particular artist was well known as a poet, and he was well known for his using very novel language. And he writes cold fish stench. I've never seen that expression before. And I had to look up that character 3 times before I could figure out what he was saying. I mean, who writes about stench, the stench of a rotting fish or something like that, or a raw fish? Cold fish stench fills the paper blown by a flapping breeze, and the flapping of the breeze is caused by the fins of the fish that are flapping. White scales fly forth, and the ink pond is empty. So he's bringing attention to the paper, he's bringing attention to the ink, he's bringing attention to his creation of the painting. And then he turns the poem back on himself, and he says, I truly hate this floating world for its many unseeing eyes. Who gets that its ordinary form, in other words, the fish, was once that of a dragon? Okay, so he's saying, in other words, that the fish is somebody who is like himself, whose talents are unrecognized. And he was worthy of being a dragon, but now is simply seen as an ordinary fish.
So what I'm getting, Dr. Sturman, is a involvement of every human sense. So sight, smell, taste.
Yeah, that's true.
Kinetic. There's also quality of movement. There's, what do they call that when you see something and you see a color? Like my mom has that when she hears music, she sees a color and sees a number.
Yeah, I don't
forget what that's called, but it's when the brain has all these cross circuits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. That's what that feels like cold fish stench fills the paper. It doesn't fill the paper, it fills the nose. But in his case, he's the artist, and so therefore it's filling the paper.
Right.
Blown by flapping fin breeze. Well, the fish that he's portraying is just an image. It's not the real thing. So how can it do that? But on the same token, art stands before reality in a really obvious way. So yeah, that's marvelous. White scales fly forth. Well, when you see a fish leap, you get the reflection of the scales, but you also see that in the negative space of the paper. So it's glaringly bright in between 2 dark lines. It's amazing. That's beautiful. Richard's giving us a sign we have to go to quick break. This is just wonderful. I'm going to talk a little bit about what your paper is about.
Okay.
I know the title, but I want to know more when we get back from the break. Reintroducing, I'm talking with Dr. Peter Sturman, and I'm talking about his involvement in a one-day lecture series called Flowers, Gardens, Self-Reflection in Chinese Painting at our museum, where Susan Tai has convened many of the top scholars in this particular field to present papers in celebration of the exhibit it's still there, but it's at the tail end. So you have time to see that exhibit, but you also have time to sign up for the lecture. Don't turn that down. Back in a minute. Hey, Richard, let's go to quick break.
All right, you're clear.
Well, that's, and then isn't the floating world, isn't that also a concept in Japanese art?
It is,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So is he referencing, I don't know, the sort of the universality of art with that phrase, or?
I believe it's the term originally comes from Buddhism.
Okay.
The idea of the world as being ephemeral and illusory. You're right. It was largely adopted by the Japanese. In fact, ukiyo-e are pictures of the floating
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't see it so much in Chinese art like this, but there it is. Yeah, it's a.
But maybe it's not referential in that way in regards to art itself, but it certainly is referential when you talk about a fish.
That's true.
And the fish has the whole world that floats in himself or herself. And yeah. And I don't know, I got the end with the dragon as like you were saying that his talents are unrecognized, like that he could have been or should have been perceived as a dragon, but instead he's perceived as a lowly carp. I got the dragon as isn't the dragon the most powerful of all symbols?
It is.
Yeah.
But it's also dragon is a fish,
Yeah.
in Chinese thinking, Chinese correlative thinking. So I mean, dragons are associated with water, so it's kind of the same group together with fish.
And it springs, what do they call it? Chimera. Yeah, it springs from fishness.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And I truly hate this floating world, but he participates in it and pictures himself as a fish.
Yeah.
And he's a great artist and poet.
Well, I got to say, Elizabeth, I feel very fortunate that I happen to have this PowerPoint on my other computer up because I would have been hard pressed to answer your questions otherwise, to come up
I
with
think
examples.
it's fantastic. It's like I said, it's so different from the way we look. So we separate out, when we're there in the white cube of a gallery or a museum, we see, oh, well, we're supposed to be seeing with our eyes. We're not supposed to be smelling, tasting, feeling, um, um, putting a poem behind it, using words as a symbolic expression. We're just supposed to look, the art of seeing. It's a divorce, really. And that's why I loved your 2012 exhibition. And I still use that concept. For example, now my son's father is getting up there in age. And he is no longer being really asked to do much in his company. And he feels that he has no purpose right now. And I said, I saw this exhibit. When you get to be your age.
All right, stand by. Here we go in 3, 2, 1. You are live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart. I'm speaking with Dr. Peter Sturman, and we're talking about the concepts that will be brought up in a one-day lecture series at our art museum. Susan Tai has pulled together the most eminent scholars in the field to talk about flowers, gardens, and self-reflection in Chinese painting on January 6th. And I asked Dr. Sturman if he would talk to us a little bit about the paper that he was presenting. All the scholars are presenting their own papers. And so I asked Dr. Sturman, what is he going to talk about?
Well, I'm the title of my talk is Falling Flowers on a River: Contemplations of Nature and Mortality. So this was kind of serendipitous. I previously had worked on a topic which you actually mentioned in introducing me, of an earlier artist by the name of Shenzhou, who lived at the very end of the kind of second half of the 15th century into the very beginning of the 16th century. And I discovered that there was a series of paintings that he did and poems called Falling Flowers, which I thought was very interesting, and nobody had really picked it up as a topic before. So I worked on this. This is already quite a number of years ago, but it was a great research topic. It proved to have a lot of mileage. I got a lot of mileage out of it. Let me put it that way. But it was very interesting. Shenzhou is a very famous artist, one of the most famous in China. And the falling flowers as a theme was related to his recognition of the fact that he was getting very old and he didn't have much more time left. And he basically projected that into the image of flowers on fruit trees, plum and apricot, peaches, that unfortunately he missed because he was ill. So, I mean, one of the seasonal pleasures for him was to see in his garden, the flowering of the trees. And by the time he was able to rise from being ill, the flowers had already fallen. So he wrote a series of poems about this. And then after that, some of his students, his pupils, were very much encouraged by Shenzhou writing these poems. So they did what Chinese poets do. They rhymed the poems, which is a way of honoring the original author. You write your own poems, but use the same rhymes. This is a kind of an elegant pastime. And then after his students did that, then Shenzhou felt obligated to then rhyme their poems. So it became this kind of self-perpetuating motor or engine in which pretty soon you had pretty much everybody writing poems about falling flowers. And the whole nature of the project kind of changed over time. And Shenzhou became very much aware of this, and he was very self-conscious of the fact that here he was, somebody who should be nearing the end of his life, kind of competing with the younger generation to write better poems. So it's a kind of an interesting, self-reflection on oneself as one grows older. He was almost 80 years old at this point. And anyway, there's a lot in these paintings and in the poems themselves, and even in the calligraphy for that matter. And I recognize that the centerpiece of the current exhibition, unfortunately, we don't have any Shenzhou paintings, so he could have been included in this exhibition. He should have, ideally, because he was a great painter of flower and birds. But nonetheless, the centerpiece of this exhibition is this very, very long hand scroll that I described, the 8-character frontispiece, right, by Su Chang. The paintings by Bada Shanren. And that's really the whole reason for this exhibition. I mean, the chance to bring this painting, this scroll, to Santa Barbara is very, very rare. It's one of the great paintings in the history of China. Very, very important. And it was worked on extensively by my wife, who's a professor of Chinese art history at UCLA, Weishu Li. And in fact, if we go back to our 2012 exhibition, The Artful Recluse, my wife, Huishu, Dr. Lee, I should call her, added a scholarly article on Bada Shanren. And she focused on this particular painting, even though the painting wasn't in the exhibition. So in some ways, this is a kind of a follow-up to the 2012 exhibition. It's kind of like bringing this one painting that ideally would have been in the 2012 exhibition here to Santa Barbara. And it really is a rare opportunity to see this painting. So it's just kind of serendipitous. But this particular painting is called Flowers on the River, or Flowers on a River. And it bears a lot of the same kind of ideas and concepts. It's followed by this very, very long poem, really a song. It's very, very cryptic. Bada Shanren is a very difficult artist to understand because the paintings are very approachable, but the poems that he added to his paintings, or in this particular case, a ballad that he composed, is very, very difficult to decode. And Huishu was able to do that. And when you do that, all of the meanings in the painting kind of come out. And it proves to be in some ways, very similar to what Shenzhou did, roughly 200 years earlier, by reflections on mortality and the meaning of life. So I'm kind of pulling these two projects, one which is my own research and one which is I'm kind of borrowing from my wife's. But it's very good scholarship and needs to be further promoted. to talk a little and shine a light on this particular painting in the exhibition.
So 2 questions before we go to break. So Shenzhou, this is at the end of the 15th or and the beginning of the 16th century. Okay, that's the falling flowers on a river. That's the work, his work.
He did a number of paintings, but basically on the theme of falling flowers.
And then later, Bhattachandra takes the mantle and writes poems to those paintings. Is that correct?
I don't know if there's a direct connection.
Okay.
Because Bhattachandran doesn't mention anything about Shenzhou, but he certainly would have known about it because it was such a, he didn't live that far apart in time, and it was such a well-known event in the kind of the culture of Suzhou, China in the 16th century. But before Shenzhou, this idea of falling flowers, and particularly falling flowers that fall, blossoms falling on the river, and the river carries them along. So flowers on a river. That's that goes back much earlier. That goes back to ancient times in China, as this kind of metaphor for the fragility of human life.
You mentioned that just the second question. You mentioned that the poems that the poet was creating, that his initial poems were rhymed by the younger generation, etc. And then in turn he rhymed poems to their poetry. And you said he woke up and said, wow, I'm competing with the younger generation. But on the same level, I'm referencing your show in 2012, where part of the elder's role is to mentor. And it would seem to me that this was a way of mentoring the younger poets.
Oh yeah, he was just being humble.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. Well, we'll go to a quick break on that note. And you, dear listener, you get a sense of the richness of this material. Listening to Dr. Sturman, how elegant and how intricately woven the text and the art and the calligraphy and the mood and the tenor and the eras are, and why this is a must-see or must-hear lecture series, January 6th at the museum. Okay, Richard, let's go to quick break.
All right, you're clear.
Anyway, so I was saying, Dr. Sturman, so my son's father is now getting up there in years, and he's like, oh, Elizabeth, I feel, what's my role? He was a very driven career person all his life. What's my role? And I don't know what to do. And I said, well, yeah, I saw this exhibit. People that were in your position that had raised kids and had grandkids and had successful business, they would go off into the woods and paint. Why don't you try that? So he did.
Good for him.
Yeah, he did. And he loves it. And he's actually entered, he lives here up in San Diego. He lives. And he's entered a couple of art shows. He's doing a lot of watercolors now on the beach. And, he's got a couple of, what do you call it, into some juried shows already. And it's just watercolor. That's all he's doing.
That's great.
Yeah. But and then the next step, basically he's been doing that for a couple of years, the watercolors. And he said, well, what's next, do you think? What's next? And I said, well, mentorship. Other cultures do it when you get to a situation like you're in now. So to one of these show, you've been juried into some of these little galleries, go to the gallerist and say, I want to do a series on watercolor approaches. And get your students in there. So he's not doing that, but he's doing, he read Kandinsky's treatise. Now he's doing a whole thing on, what art really means, la, 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 la. So he's doing a lecture series for some of the younger generations. That he's he's a trained engineer, so I kind of dread hearing what he's come up with regards Kandinsky. I really do. It's like, how do you think?
Interesting.
Or maybe it's good that he's an engineer in regards to them. So.
Okay, you've got 10 minutes to the end of the show. In 3, 2, 1, you are live.
Welcome back. It's Elizabeth Stewart, the great honor of speaking with Dr. Peter Sturman in regards to a one-day lecture series that is going to take place January 6th at our art museum. Susan Tai, curator, has pulled this together with the most eminent scholars. How many scholars are coming, Dr. Sturman?
I think we're 7 altogether.
Yeah.
So it includes some local personalities or at least California personalities, but people from all over.
Is your wife coming?
She is. She's
speaking.
She's speaking. We've got the papers presented in more or less chronological order. It's an interesting setup because the guest of honor in many ways is my former professor, Richard Barnhart, who in 1984, he did a very important exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum in New York called Peach Blossom Spring, which was all about gardens and bird and flower painting. It was very successful, and it was the first real exhibition that showed the potential for this subject matter to be used in very intricate ways, and it was lovely. And so when this exhibition came, was scheduled to come to Santa Barbara, Huishu was also, my wife, was also a student of Dick Barnhart's. So we recommended that Susan invite him. He's up there in age. He's almost 90 years old. So I'm a little bit surprised that he's coming, but very happy. And he's going to be coming, and he also did, it's very appropriate because he and a former professor of ours named Wang Fang Yu, Fred Wang, arranged an exhibition of Badashanren, the same artist who did this long scroll. And that exhibition was at Yale in around 1990 or 1989, something like that. I forget the exact date. So that was also a landmark exhibition. So Dick Barnhart was very much involved with the birds and flowers, and then Badashanren. So it was I'm sure that's the reason why he accepted this invitation. He wants to see this painting. And then after Richard Barnhart, we have a bunch of students of his. Huishu is a student of his. She's talking about interesting painting of a garden of the 13th century. So that's a little bit outside of the scope of this exhibition, but it will help provide context to the general theme of bird and flower painting and gardens in particular. And then I give my talk on which will be on, as I mentioned, Falling Flowers on a River, Contemplations of Nature and Mortality. Then Stephen Little, who's the curator of Chinese art and the head of the Chinese, Korean, and Southeast Asian art departments at LACMA. He's giving a talk about paintings as they were collected at the Qing Dynasty court related to the subject matter of flowers and birds. We have, so Stephen was also a student of Dick Barnhart's. And then we have another former student of Dick Barnhart's, Shoujir Yen, or Yen Shoujir, who's going to be talking about Xu Wei, the same artist whose poem about the fish I just read. So he's coming. And then we have 2 students. One is my student and one is a student of Huishu's, who are recently minted PhDs. Huishu's student a little bit earlier. And
we have to say goodbye, but one more shout out. This lecture series is the 6th of January, so do not delay. Go to the museum's website and get your tickets. Dr. Sturman, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
All right, and you are clear.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Sturman. I appreciate that. If I can get these grandkids well again, I want to come to the lecture. Do you have grandkids?
Not yet.
No.
And at the rate my kids are going, it might take a while.
Okay.
We had our daughters late, and they're very career oriented right now, so we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you again. And yeah, keep my email, because if there's something happening, I want to know about it, and we'll do something together.
Okay.
Definitely. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Nice
Bye.
talking. Okay. Bye-bye.